Thanks so much, gentlemen. Please have a seat. Okay, so for this session today, we're going to be exploring how projects are designed in order to catalyze positive climate action. And we're also going to discuss how such projects are relevant for non-island stakeholders. So we'll start by just having our panelists describe these projects they're involved in one by one and introduce themselves. We'll start with Francesco Sindico.
Thank you very much, Stacy, and to those in the room and to those online. It's a great pleasure to be here. This time my hat is Scottish Government, so I am a professor in international environmental law at Strathclyde Law School in Glasgow, but I'm on secondment at the Scottish Government. And there I lead the Carbon Neutral Islands project, and that is a program for government commitment that supports 6 islands in Scotland to become carbon neutral by 2040. And I'll be happy to expand later, but I'll let Jan introduce himself and then we can take it from there.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And sorry to arrive just on time. So I'm involved in 2 island projects. One is the Clean Energy for EU Island Secretariat, where I'm the coordinator together with a team of different organizations and partners, of which also Pau, but he will explain that. And our main mission for this 3rd phase of the Clean Energy for EU Island Secretariat is to make 30 islands 100% renewable. So that's our goal. The second island project I'm involved in is called the Green Overseas Energy Transition Community. And that's a program specifically focused on overseas territories and countries. And so in the Pacific, the Caribbean, the Arctic, and that's also where we do online training workshops on the energy transition on islands.
Thank you. And over now to Pau, please.
So my name is Pau de Vilchez. I'm a professor of international law at the University of the Balearic Islands, and there I'm the deputy director of the Interdisciplinary Lab on Climate Change, and I'm also the president of the Climate Change Committee of the Balearic Islands. So I'm here as a representative of the islands themselves.
Great. So you can hold on to the mic and we'll have you just tell us more about the project that you're involved in.
Okay. So first of all, I wanted to say something, because I think we're all here because we care about the environment and we care about the living species and we care about ourselves as human beings. And I think that's the force behind everything we do, caring about others. And I just wanted to say that I'm deeply saddened and outraged about what's going on in Gaza and the continuous killing of innocent people. And I think I should say that here because it's necessary to say if we are going to save the world, we need to save the people who live in the world. So this being said, it is both a challenge and a privilege to work on decarbonizing islands. Because they're so different. I mean, they're islands where very few population live there and who are economically depressed. And I come from islands that are buoyant with a great economy in terms of GDP and where we don't actually see the need to do a transition. Because the energy transition can be a fantastic lever to improve the level of well-being of people from islands. So the challenge is how do you convince people that keep doing the same thing, which is actually wreaking havoc on the planet, because our economy depends on planes and boats coming from all around the world, to actually change that. And it's interesting. It's interesting because, of course, there are economic interests in actually doing the transition. I mean, our main imports are fossil fuels. So if we do the transition, the money we spend in actually making all those fossil fuels come here to the islands could be spent elsewhere. It is also a question of diversifying the economy. So we've lost a lot of agricultural activity, industrial activity throughout the years because of tourism. So the energy transition, in a way, is a tool so that we can recover other kind of activities and discover new kind of activities, for instance, research at my university. Thanks.
Thank you. Jan, over to you.
Yes, well, I'm going to take a slightly different angle just for, the sake of, well, discussion or at least give different perspectives. And that is, recently I was listening to a podcast on energy and it was about battery storage. And the person, the expert, an American, he was talking all the time about islanding a certain industrial site. And obviously, being involved and engaged with the islands, I thought that was funny that on the mainland, in some sort of industrial corner of the United States, they try to island themselves. And then I was thinking, well, islanders, the choice is not even there to island themselves. They are islands, and they are living on islands, and so it means that their energy system needs to reflect that fact. And if we want to go renewable, if we want to go decarbonized, if we want to go decentralized, then obviously it has some implications for how you do that on an island. And the starting point, and that's also what Pau has mentioned. The starting point is petrol. I mean, the islands are almost 100% running on petrol. There are some exceptions here and there with biomass and so forth, but on the whole, it's for transport, for electricity, for heating or cooling, it's all petrol, and that's what we need to get rid of, and that's what we need to find alternatives for that have the same level of comfort, and that's why we had in the last phase of the Clean Energy for EU Island Secretariat. We actually gathered a lot of evidence in studies, pre-feasibility studies on different ways of doing that, different technologies, different approaches, different community visions and strategies and so forth, and all working on bits and pieces of this decarbonization. But now in this third phase, we selected, as said, 30 islands to go all the way to 100% renewable. Now, we say we're going to do that by 2030. Probably not gonna be the case for every island, but the idea is that's our vision. That's where we want to be. That's where we want to go. And this 100% renewable vision actually unlocks a lot of energy to go and search for solutions with the community that are strengthening them and that are actually embedded in the local economy, the local the way life is run on these islands. And I think this time we try to go wholesale. We take more time. We're going to work 3 years with particular islands. We have 30 islands from 10 different European countries, so there's a diversity. Some are really up north near the Arctic, and others are really very south and more, obviously more warmer and have, more issues of cooling than of heating. So all this variety is there, and that's, I think, interesting, that's challenging. We can learn a lot from them, also for islanding on the mainland.
Sounds good. Okay, Francesco, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jan, and it's very much building to some extent on what you said. In Scotland, when we started working on the carbon neutrality project, we put ourselves a few principles, if you want, a few drivers. The first one was a question of fairness and justice. And by that, what I mean is that there is no carbon neutrality journey if it's not driven by the people on the islands. Who am I living in Glasgow to really understand the reality of Barra, the reality of Yale, the reality of Hoy, Great Cumbria, Rassie? I gave you the 6 islands now. Now go and find them. I do not know them. I can listen to them, and there's a lot of listening mode in the work I do. That's one thing. The justice element in Scotland, I cannot speak for other islands, is that you can decarbonize even in the fastest way possible. But if it's done in a way that it's only rich people from London can end up living on the Scottish Islands, or by geoengineering and then marine and land biodiversity is gone, who wants to decarbonize that? If you put zero carbon and then you have that, I'm not in this business. And neither is Scottish government. So we had this in front of us. Then we had the big challenge, and I'm really curious also from your project how you did that, is we started with 3 islands. And in COP26, Cabinet Secretary Mary Goujon in Glasgow pushed that ambition to 6. So somebody could ask, why do you like the number 6? Now, there is a political element. In Scotland, we have 6 local authorities who have islands. 3 are only islands, Shetland Islands, Orkney Islands, and the Western Isles. And then you have 3 local authorities, Highland, Argyll and Bute, and North Ayrshire, that have mixed mainland and islands. So you know where I'm going with this. 1 island per local authority. But then we identified, together with an external group of experts and stakeholders, socio-economic-wide and island-wide. We made that decision. 6 islands that, as unique as every island is, and that is a challenge and a problem that, again, I'm curious to know how you're grasping with that within the project in the EU and also other projects that we may be aware of. Every island is unique, but on the other hand, some stories, some experiences can be shared. So we made a conscious effort in the 6 islands that I mentioned before to have as much a variety as possible. And the last thing is, in Scotland, actually, some of the islands you mentioned that are completely renewable already or are really community-driven, we have examples of that. You can mention Egg, you can mention Gia, community-owned renewables and so forth. We could have just chosen those. Choose the 6 easy ones, if you want to call them like that, and go with them. We wanted, in this mix of 6, also to find and work with islands and being led by the islanders, where I wouldn't go as far as saying they're climate skeptics, but climate change was not a priority. And let's be honest, maybe not as bad as in other countries, but let's not even put a degree of badness. Fuel poverty is a huge issue. Across Scotland, not just on an island, go to a rough part of Glasgow, you have energy poverty there. But on the islands, you have not just fuel poverty, but you have this paradox, which again you probably have in other islands of the European Union, where they can literally see the power of renewables in front of them. They have these massive offshore wind. We in Scotland we like to call ourselves the battery of Europe, wherever that will happen or not. More renewable energy generation that I can think, all the zeros you can put after, I have no idea. Incredible. But they're afraid, the people living on the islands are afraid they'll be leapfrogged by this technology, that they will still continue to pay the higher energy prices in the UK despite being next to that. So I just wanted to highlight this aspect of the 6, and then I can also touch on other aspects.
That's great. Would either of you gentlemen like to talk a bit about the challenges, just like Francesco's outlined his?
Yes, and perhaps starting with also this case of seeing the offshore wind farms in front of the island without being connected. We had a very good discussion last year in Estonia, the island of Saaremaa, where indeed in the so in the sea, the Baltic Sea, they have the potential to develop 8 gigawatt of offshore wind, and actually Estonia itself only needs 1. And all the infrastructure would run over the island, but there would be no electricity from that offshore wind for the citizens of the island. So you would have the overhead lines so for transport, but not the electricity. And then obviously you feel, that's an extreme case perhaps, but you feel that this is not right. I mean, this is not, let's say, a shared benefit of this offshore wind. Now, if we zoom out of that, and that's one particular case, but what is very important always is to have a vision that is endorsed by the community, and that's usually where we start, is by saying, well, let's get together and talk about the vision for the island, not only on energy, but the kind of island they want to be, and then how does the decarbonization, renewable energy fits into that, and how can you then, and then you can start discussing actions and so forth. But this community engagement at the core of this trajectory to renewable, 100% renewable, is very important for us. And we also demand that for those that have applied and that were selected, that there's an endorsement by the local authorities, so that, because we know, you need to have that support, otherwise you'll get stuck anyway, and it's going to be difficult enough even with that support. So, and then obviously, and that's where I think also we can get in. I was in the island, a French island, but down south near Madagascar. It's the island of Mayotte, and it's the fastest growing department in France. Every other month they need to open a new school because there's so many. So it's really a bit of. Yeah, it's different than because it's an island, but it's also different because it's a very dynamic part of France. Now, we were there, and obviously, you know, running an energy system on such an island requires expertise, requires resources, requires technicians, and so forth. And that's something which it's not that you have an army of engineers to draw from. You know, you have to. There's in many islands there's one person running the grid or two persons running the grid, and it's with that person that we want to discuss and see how can we move from, let's say, the easy way of doing that, having a central power plant pushing electricity into the grid, to the more decentralized one. And so that capacity building is extremely important, and that's also where we put a lot of emphasis on. And then finally, it's about getting the finance, because there's like a double situation. On the one hand, you have the electricity that you make on the island is usually more expensive because it's everything that needs to arrive there is more expensive, and so the equipment, but also the logistics and everything. So in the end, it is more expensive, and even if solar and wind can be competitive in other places in islands, it's usually difficult. But at the same time, and luckily so, there's also on the tariff side the solidarity mechanisms, which mostly mean that islanders pay the same kind of price for their electricity than on mainland. You have that in Greece, in Italy, in France, and in Spain, and also in the Pacific, and so forth. So it's a system that is very widely used because it reflects the fact that, you know, the cost of living cannot be so much higher because you're on an island. The problem is that obviously, as your renewable energy is more expensive and your tariff is as low as on the mainland, you don't get a lot of push and incentive then financially to do that, to go to take the renewable option. And that's where we need to work around keeping the solidarity, but finding ways of giving incentives and reasons to go 100% renewable. So those are the kind of challenges that we're tackling with. And I think it's with this variety of 30 islands, you were talking 6, with this variety of 30 islands, we'll definitely learn a lot on all the kind of different situations that we can have.
Awesome. Thanks. Over to you, Paul.
So, yeah, I'd like to mention another challenge that hasn't been mentioned so far. And this is that islands are fragile natural environments. And as such, people who live there are very attached to the landscape, the nature, and everything. So that's another challenge that we need to take into account, because, for instance, nowadays in the Balearics, there are people gathering signatures opposing solar plants, which are, in comparison, very small as compared to the continental ones. So I think that the energy transition, in a way, is an opportunity to open up the conversation, as Francesco was saying, and to talk about the future we want. And it's also an extraordinary chance to introduce other questions like justice, equity, and things like that. And I would like to mention some initiative that we just made in Mallorca, like a few months ago. We conducted a Citizens' Climate Assembly. And it was a fantastic way, with the collaboration of the university, corporations, government, etc. And we had like 60 citizens picked per chance, like that, who were representative of the diversity of the island. And it ran through 5 months. And in the end, all of them explained that that was a life-changing experience. That the fact that they had the space to actually learn, talk, discuss, and reach conclusions in a way that aims for consensus really changed the way they perceived the energy transition and the challenges, and made them want to go further and accelerate. So they wanted to go much further and faster than the government actually wanted. So whether at the start they were reluctant regarding many aspects. So I think that actually leaving space for people to understand, to talk, to ask, and to reach conclusions is a very effective way to get on it.
That's awesome. Yeah, would you like to continue?
Well, I was thinking while Pau was mentioning this environment, I was thinking of two examples. One, and it's not only the natural environment; it's also the built environment, especially in some of the older islands in Europe. And for instance, in Croatia, we had the situation. You have some of these touristic towns, and they're very beautiful, and they have these brick-colored tiles on the roofs and so forth. And okay, you can put solar panels on it, but it kind of messes with the historic character of such a beautiful town. Now, not every town is historic, but some are, and then you need to work around that. And for instance, we found that what we could do is in the periphery of the town, where basically also the parking and bus parkings were for the tourists, well, we thought if we can make solar-covered parking lots, then it's good against the heat. It creates electricity, and it integrates much better with the historic environment of the town. And that's, for instance, one of these solutions where you need to work around. I mean, it's no use saying, well, we put solar everywhere. No, that's not the idea. You put it where you can, where it's appropriate, where people find that it's included in their environment. And I give another example, not on the natural but on the economic side. It was the island of Arauza I probably pronounced it again wrongly, in Galicia, in Spain. And we looked at electrifying a fishing fleet. And so we talked to the fishermen and asked, like, well, when do you go fishing? And say, we go early morning once, and then we go late in the afternoon once. Which actually is ideal, because it means that the boats are in at noon. And that's when the sun is best. And so we worked with technical models and so forth to see, can we have enough capacity, solar and battery, in order to make sure that these fishermen always have fully charged boats when they want to leave again. They come back, we charge them, and then they must leave again with a full battery, because obviously their livelihood depends on it. It's not something you can take lightly. It has to work, and it has to work every day. And so we designed an energy system around this fisherman's fleet, and that was very exciting, I found, because that's really the kind of solution that works in this situation. Might not work in another, then you have to find another solution.
Great. I love that you've highlighted that in islands, we're all so different. You can't take that overly cookie-cutter approach to just apply best practices. They always have to be tweaked a bit. So I wanted to know, kind of moving on from that, what aspects of your approach do you think can be adapted for wider application beyond islands?
So before I share some thoughts on that, I think we need to also circle back to why is this particularly relevant for islands? And in Scotland, there is specific legislation on islands. The legislation is in order to island-proof central government policies. We're in an island of hope space, so obviously we're all interested in islands. Many of you come from islands, so obviously you will be interested in islands. But I think especially in Europe, we have plenty of countries like Scotland, Germany, the Netherlands, France, Italy, which have a big mainland and then islands. And the islands, and I can speak for Scotland, have often and continue to feel unheard, be it in Madrid or in Edinburgh. So the way to amend that in Scotland has been through legislation, and now there's policy. I'm part of the islands team in government that works towards that. We can do better, obviously, but that's a first step. And I say this because a lot of the examples we heard could be relevant also for coastal communities on the mainland. There's not really that big of a difference. A coastal town with beautiful architecture near Naples also has that problem and similar things. So I do think there's an interesting question here. Why is it particularly crucial for islands. And then the question you ask becomes pertinent. How do we do it? So, but let me just explain to the audience and then make, in a way, an offer of collaboration to Jan. So in Scotland, the way we do this carbon neutral island project is, as I said, putting the people at the heart, creating a structure whereby there are resources, money, that goes to the 6 islands, and those 6 islands drive the process through a combination of steering groups, local anchor organization, and very importantly, community development officers, which are people who live on the island. A lot of times it's young people who have returned to the islands, which is one of the best things we have done, I think. And then they support a carbon audit, not just energy, also land-related, very importantly in Scotland. That informs a community climate change action plan, which is written in, I like to call it island language, meaning priorities, actions, concrete stuff on the ground, and it's a living document. And now, what we're doing this year is 2 things. One, the investment side. So we are really trying to figure out how to leverage investment, public, private, and private, so that this doesn't just become a flashy document that is thrown in a cupboard and nobody opens it and uses it. And then the question becomes, and I hate the word, but I still can't find a better one, replicability. And this is really about the title, the transformational power of pilots. How can we go from a pilot, how can we go from 30, and hopefully you know the number, to all the other islands in Europe? And I'm sure they're in the hundreds, if not in the thousands. Exactly. So in Scotland, we have 93 inhabited islands. Some people will say 87, but you get the gist. We have 6 pilots. First thing, the other 87 have not standed very idle. I told you, a lot of good practices come from either off-grid or grid-related, amazing stuff coming from Orkney, community buyouts in Gia, you name it. So it's also the other way around. How can the other thousands of islands in the EU provide their good practices to the 30 that are included in the project? How can that happen in Scotland? Now the offer is, and I say this a bit in a cheekish way, Scotland is and will always be European, whatever happens. And we would love, in whatever way possible, to be part of this conversation. For whatever strange reason, which I do not know, we cannot be eligible for this project, which obviously I'm not happy of. But the possibility of having that conversation and learning from each other, I think, should be on the tables, and that is, in a way, my offer. How to bring everything to the mainland? Obviously, you could say the rural and coastal communities, as I just said, are relevant for this conversation. But I also think that we can go beyond that. Because if we look at public participation, if we look at justice, fairness, look at the big cities in Europe that we know. They're dying. They're dying. They're not fair anymore. So there are a lot of things that islanders can at least share with non-islanders and vice versa. I'll stop there.
Thanks. Would anyone else like to add to that, please?
Okay, so I guess in a way, you made me think that in order to tackle climate change and all of the challenges that lay ahead of us, we really need to build strong communities. And that is on islands, in cities, in regions, everywhere. But not to repeat some things that have already been said, and trying to link what is done in the islands to what could be done elsewhere. For instance, in the Balearic Islands, the previous government was quite ingenious and wanted to do things a little bit differently. So we used to see, like, I don't know, government does this, a private sector does that, and the people try to, well, maybe have some grants or whatever to do other stuff. But the government tried to take a step further, and they tried to link everything. For instance, in order to go beyond the fears for renewables and also the cost of installing renewables, they actually did a kind of participatory installations, PV installations. So they chose like the local school, high school, and they covered everything with PV panels, and the government did the investment, but at the same time, half of the energy was for the local municipality and the school, and the rest was sold at cost price to all the citizens that lived in the village, around 1,500 meters, which is most of the villages in the island. And this started like a pilot, and only 1 or 2 villages wanted to do that, because what the hell is this? And also from the part of the local public servants, they were not used at all to those kind of thing. But 1-2 years later, all municipalities wanted that. And this is a way to actually reach people and to make it something local and real. So I think this is a nice example of what could be done.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Would anyone else like to add to that?
Yes, well, I think one of the key issues is to have more local production of energy and have it community owned. That's a really strong motivator to speak to islanders and say, well, you know, instead of importing everything, we can do this on our own. And I give one example. It's a well-known island in the island community. It's one of the poster islands, so to say, is Samsø. And there's a lot being said about Samsø, but one of the things I like particularly there is their system of biomass with which they fuel a district heating system. It's a Danish island, so many, you know, in many times of the year it's cold. So they made contracts with local farmers to produce the hay that can be used in this district heating system. They also work with solar thermal on the side and so forth. But and that actually delivered the buy-in of an important community on that island, which is the agricultural community, which is not always the community which is easiest to convince to adopt new ways and to buy into it. But by buying into that, they also bought into the rest. Namely community ownership of the offshore wind turbines, which are, there's 6 turbines in the prolongation of the island, and again there it's almost beautiful if you want. But they went door to door and tried to convince people, do you want to participate? This is what you're gonna have, and so this community ownership was very important in the strategy. In the end, it's about technological choices. And it's about equipment, and it becomes technical, but at the heart, it's about community ownership, I think, of the process, but also of the technologies and of the energy system in the island.
Yeah, I'm seeing that as a recurring theme, the concept of community ownership and the fact that this is something coming from an island in the global south. It's amazing to me just how many things you've mentioned that we have in common in terms of when it comes to energy issues, particularly that concern about local communities not benefiting from something that is done right at their doorstep. We definitely have that fear. So in terms of looking to wrap up, any parting words or words of wisdom you'd like to tell us about in terms of these projects and pilots and how you think, you know, we can all benefit when it comes to the climate crisis?
I'm happy to go first, and also I don't know whether we have the opportunity to engage a little bit with the audience as well, so I'll be very brief. When you think of the bigger problem, climate change as a whole, and I think of Scotland, I mean, the islands count very little in terms of emissions. So by decarbonizing 2030, you know, it's great. From a climate change perspective, it's still a speck in the ocean. When I think of that, and even the Carbon Neutrality Project starts like that, and we go to the islands, and we talk to the islands, and by that I mean the people on the island, and say, you shape the journey as you believe best. Clearly there's an environmental aspect, but it has to be much more than that, as you said. And one problem, one big challenge we have in Scotland is volunteer fatigue. We like talking about community energy, we have nice posters, I can tell you all about it, but actually a lot of it has started working at night, working on a Saturday, Sunday, unpaid, looking for grants. That has to stop. People talk about island community, island spirit. Stop saying that. People on islands, at least in Scotland, need to have a better quality of life in that sense. They need to just get paid for what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying they can't do community stuff, by all means. But I do think, at least the experience I am living, there's consultation fatigue. You mentioned the community consultation. We can talk about it later, but problem in Scotland, you ask them to come on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Thursday, on a Friday, and they say, look, I'm not doing it for the money, but actually, if I come here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm not doing something in the fields or in the port or something. I cannot do so much public participation. So I'll stop with that.
Well, to go further on that, indeed, I mean, in terms of numbers, it's not the emissions from islands that change the equation. But I think it's more a wider message. It's about the care for communities, people that live in different circumstances. Peripheral, you might name it, although that has some pejorative ring to it. But that's not different from the mainland. All over Europe you have these regions, and it's it becomes a big political topic about the urban centers against the countryside. In many of our countries, this is becoming a political, even an electoral issue. And it's the same thing. It's about care for those for whom the energy transition might just be a little harder because of the circumstances in which they live and the kind of natural endowment they have. And I want to stop with saying, if you look at it from the energy system again, which is our specialty, so sorry to always come back to this energy system, but the main difference between the mainland, Europe, and the islands of Europe was the mainland had pipelines with gas. And now we no longer have pipelines with gas. So it also comes by boat to the mainland Europe. And so actually I think we've gotten closer in that sense. We face on a continental scale the same situation of having to provide energy security through decarbonization, through the shift to renewables. It gives us a bigger energy security. And that's, I think, a lesson we can learn from the islands, that energy security is actually best had at home on the island with community-powered energy.
We already said that it's a challenge to do the energy transition in islands, or transitions in general. And islands are extremely diverse. And there are privileged people, there are oppressed people, there are people that count more when the decision has to be taken, etc. But at the same time, the world is an island. We live in an island. We all live in the same island, which is the Earth. And what we see on the islands at a lower scale is the same kind of dynamics that we can observe at a world level. So I think, in a way, if we are able to overcome these challenges at an island level, is also proof that if we really, really insist, we can overcome them at the world level, and that is why we are here. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that phrase, the world is an island, I'm definitely going to remember that forever. Thank you. So I'd like to hear now, are there any questions from the audience? We would get you a mic if you have any questions or comments at this point. Okay, great. Someone at the back. Here you go.
Hello, I'm Jason Petralia from Anthropogenic. Sorry, I arrived a little late, but question is around financing islands. I talked to many island nations, several here at COP, and they're all eager to transition. They've plethora of wind and solar, but the financing, it seems to be a recurring challenge. I'm looking to help as many of them as I can, and so I'm curious about any successes or any opportunities that we can have, or what financial institution has been the most aggressive in funding island nations with things like solar and wind, so they don't burn diesel fuel and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Indeed, and it's a recurring question, the financing, and it's true. We have to be honest. Without support, it's very difficult to have all the projects financed on the islands themselves. So support is needed. But the good news is that, and here's a beautiful example actually of how some of the broader policies in Europe have worked back or are working back to the islands. And for instance, after COVID, you had a program called the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which basically was European money that was borrowed and then used by the member states to revive the economy after COVID, after the downturn that it had caused. And actually, quite a few countries like Italy, Spain, they have reserved considerable amounts of money for the islands and said, okay, here's the dedicated island fund with which we will support projects on the islands and give that extra that is needed to leverage it. Now, so, and the same is on the international level. There are financing programs that have dedicated chapters or dedicated funds towards islands. But then the difficulty starts of accessing that, and also the rules of how these are distributed is very important. And there, for instance, it's very interesting, you know, the variety you have. In Italy, they basically distributed it on communal level. So each got something, and then not many rules on how it is used. Whereas in Spain, it's much more, it started from a reflection on what are the programs that we want to support, what are the mechanisms that are needed to leverage that extra investment. So it's not only the money that needs to be there, it's accessing it and the rules of using it so as to generate more. And that's a question, I mean, whether it's a loss and damage fund, whether it's a global environmental facility. I mean, it's the same kind of discussion at the global level than at the local level. I'm quite optimistic that we can also help there. And for instance, in the 30 for 30, the 30 islands that we want to support in becoming 100% renewable, we explicitly now have our financial advisors that will help to go and search for funds. And go and help and do the applications so that we access those funds that exist that are useful for the islands.
Commenting on the Scottish experience, but being very fully aware that your question is probably more related to SIDS, or as we like to call them, large oceanic states. When it comes to Scotland, as I said, we are in the process of doing exactly what you just said. So identifying and supporting islands to leverage existing public funds, public-private partnership, and driving private investment. However, the latter two are very challenging because of economies of scale. We are talking in Scotland sometimes of islands that have 60 people on them, 180 people on them, 1,000 people on them. And there will be examples of that in the Aeoli Islands in Italy, in some Greek islands. How in the earth can an island of 60 people be competitively interesting to private sector? However, if you look to Greece and you do your digging, you'll see that the likes of Volkswagen, the like of Amazon, are, for whatever reason, investing in pilots. So to me, this question is really something that I want to dig from the practice, even from the research if you want. How can the good practices, the investment that Volkswagen is doing in Astipalea, amazing stuff, how can it transform other islands? How can it be replicated? How can the Amazon island, which I think is Naxos maybe, I don't remember, one of them. Because somebody went to that company saying, invest in that specific island, even if it's not competitive, even if there's not a financial gain. But how do we bring more of that in a way that actually benefits the island community as well as the investor?
That's a great point.
I would add just one thing, is that we talk a lot about investing, but I think it's also a question of justice and equity. And in Europe, for instance, which is the most equitable continent in the world, 10% of the population have 60% of the wealth. And in other continents, the 10 wealthiest have 80% of the wealth. So, I mean, the money to pay for these kind of things is there. And we also really need to devise ways of putting this money into service, because it's a question of survival. So, of course, investment, welcome, but we also need to get the money, even when that money doesn't want to come.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think the idea of there being different financial vehicles and mechanisms and different concepts of financing, like impact investing, I know is something that's coming into the fore. So yeah, we definitely have to continue the conversation, I think. If there are any other questions, if they're not, I would like to wrap up right now and say thank you so much to Francesco and Jan and Paul. We really had a fantastic conversation today. Thank you so much to you gentlemen.
Thank you.